Welcome to the United Lodge of Theosophists in Washington, D.C. We hold a meeting every Sunday at 11 a.m., a lecture and occasionally roundtable discussion of a theosophical topic. But before we open the meeting, we'd like to acknowledge the Declaration of the United Lodge of Theosophists, because it's our sort of guiding principles for unity. The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of theosophy without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It's loyal to the great founders of the theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to give it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of theosophy, and the exemplification and practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self and a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization. And it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with these declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves, by study and otherwise, to be the better able to help and teach others. It is said that the true theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. And today we have a reading from The Voice of the Silence, page 78. Now bend thy head and listen well, O Bodhisattva. Compassion speaks and saith, can there be bliss when all that lives must suffer? Shalt thou be saved and hear the whole world cry? Now thou hast heard that which was said. Thou shalt attain the seventh step and cross the gate of final knowledge, but only to wed woe, if thou wouldst be Tathagata. Follow upon thy predecessor's steps. Remain unselfish till the endless end. Thou art enlightened, choose thy way. Behold, the mellow light that floods the eastern sky. In signs of praise both heaven and earth unite. And from the fourfold manifested powers a chant of love ariseth, both from the flaming fire and flowing water, and from sweet-smelling earth and rushing wind. Hark! From the deep unfathomable vortex of that golden light in which the victor bathes, all nature's wordless voice in thousand tones ariseth to proclaim, joy unto ye, O men of Mialba! A pilgrim hath returned back from the other shore. A new Arhan is born. Peace to all beings. And now today's talk, Hierarchies of Compassion.
Friends, as the first speaker noted, the work we have on hand is often absorbing and lofty. And the subject we have before us, Hierarchies of Compassion, is certainly no exception. There's a lot of words, a lot of terminology, and a lot of concepts that go into this one subject, hierarchies. Even setting aside for the moment compassion, hierarchies alone comprise a vast array of ideas within the theosophical literature. And so we'll try to cover as much as we can. I'll make a list here of some of the terms that we'll be trying to cover, trying to hit, and hopefully we'll get through all of it. It's a subject that really could go on and on and on, but there's some key passages from the Secret Doctrine by H.P. Blavatsky that help to illustrate these ideas and help us understand the ideas. We'll include this idea of compassion. Let's take a moment actually to talk about compassion. Of course, compassion is fundamental to everything, right? It's really at the heart of any subject you could choose within Theosophy. And what we will do is talk about the hierarchies, and then as we wrap up the presentation, we'll talk about how compassion figures in a more specific way. But first, let's talk about what the hierarchies are. So just for space, I'm just going to do this for now. So hierarchies, Primordial Builders is one of the terms that we hear when talking about the hierarchies. We certainly hear Dhyan Chohans comes up a lot. The Lipika and the Petris are both terms that we hear. In particular, the solar Petris. We'll largely try to avoid some of the Sanskrit terms, but it'll be necessary to use them. We'll use them, but we will explain them in more detail. The Kumaras, sometimes called just the Kumara in plural. The Manasa Putras. Devas, Planetary Spirits. Angels is another term that we hear. Archangels. We might also include adepts, sages, mahatmas, but they don't really fit into the hierarchies themselves. We'll learn later, especially when we start to talk about compassion. We'll learn how they figure into it, into this system. But for now, we're really talking about these classes of beings. These are celestial hierarchies, celestial beings. Builders, primordial builders. We sometimes call them creators, sometimes watchers. The primary group that we'll be talking about today will be the Dhyan Chohans. Some of these are like subclasses of Dhyan Chohans. Like the Kumara are a particular type of Dhyan Chohans, a particular class. Devas is perhaps a more general term, but it's often used interchangeably with Dhyan Chohans. Again, Planetary Spirit, a particular class of Dhyan Chohan. So I'm going to turn now to the text that we're working with here, which is the Secret Doctrine, to try to illustrate a little bit more of the background of these. It's worth noting that although we'll jump around with different terminology, we do rest pretty comfortably in the Sanskrit terminology, and that's true for many theosophical subjects. But the idea of hierarchies does show up in many different traditions, really all traditions, certainly all esoteric traditions. So she says that the first primordial are the highest beings on the scale of existence. They are the Archangels of Christianity, those who refuse, as Michael did in the latter system, and as did the eldest mind-born sons of Brahma, to create, or rather to multiply. So this is a kind of an abstruse place to start, but we're trying to introduce the idea that there's a distinction between the primordial builders and the subsequent 7 builders. The Dhyan Chohans are introduced in stanza 4, where it says, "From the effulgency of light, the ray of the ever-darkness, sprung in space the reawakened energies," Dhyan Chohans. So they really exist at this very, very high level. And the Dhyan Chohans also establish a what's called a ring pass knot, which is it's also called like the Dhyani's rope. It's a boundary that cannot be crossed between the phenomenon and the noumenon, or the mortal material world and the world of spirit. And it's represented by a numerical hierarchy. It's called the numerical hierarchy of the Dhyan Chohans, and it's the 3-1-4-1-5. So I'm going to return to these subjects more later. Right now we're talking about the Primordial Builders and the Dhyan Chohans. And this numerical hierarchy defines that ring, which of course a ring, a circle, this is pi, and it's significant that there are 2 ones in this. They act as delimiters for the 3, the 4, and the 5, but they in and of themselves represent kind of like 2 different sources, if you will. Here. I want to talk about the 2 ones. The way she phrases it is, she says, in occult metaphysics there are, properly speaking, 2 ones. There's the one on the unreachable plane of absoluteness and infinity, on which no speculation is possible. And the second one, she puts these in quotes, on the plane of emanations. So the former can neither emanate nor be divided, as it is eternal, absolute, and immutable. The second one, being, so to speak, the reflection of the first one. For it is the logos, or Eshwara, in the universe of illusion. And it can do all of this meaning it can emanate and it can be divided. She says it emanates from itself as the upper Sephirothal triad emanates the lower 7 Sephiroth. This is another, probably some other words we should have put here, which is Sephiroth. The 7 rays, or Dhyan Chohans. In other words, homogeneous becomes heterogeneous. The protyle differentiates into the elements. Let's see. But these, unless they return into their primal element, can never cross beyond the laya, or 0 point. This is, again, that ring pass knot. The heterogeneous, once it's manifest, can't ever cross over into the homogeneous. Says the Lipika separate. Okay, this is getting into the Lipika. I want to talk about them actually a little bit later. I apologize for jumping around a little bit. It's trying to. This is the sort of the difficulty as well as the virtue of the Secret Doctrine. The ideas exist in many different places in the Secret Doctrine, and we're advised to take one particular subject and trace it through those different locations of the Secret Doctrine, rather than just reading the book from beginning to end. So even in a collection like this pamphlet, which is simply titled Cosmic Hierarchies, where it does collect all of these references, there's subjects within the idea of the hierarchies that one must kind of jump around to sort of stitch together a coherent narrative. So apologies in advance if that doesn't turn out to be the case. So the Dhyan Chohans are Devas, conscious, intelligent powers in nature. She says it like this. She says, this sloka, referring to the stanzas of Dhyan, give a brief analysis of the hierarchies of the Dhyan Chohans, called Devas, or gods, in India, or the conscious, intelligent powers in nature. To this hierarchy correspond the actual types into which humanity may be divided, for humanity as a whole is in reality a materialized, though as yet imperfect expression thereof. So the Dhyan Chohans give the evolving humanity its framework. It's the principles of a human being, the sevenfold principles of man, is a talk unto itself, and we'll probably touch on it as we get a little bit further in. But those principles don't just come from nowhere, right? Those principles actually have their origin in the Dhyan Chohans. The Dhyan Chohans manifest at the beginning of the cycle in order to provide. This is why they're called the builders and the creators. It's to provide the principles upon which man and nature is based. Okay, and it does this with the help of, or through the power of Fohat. So the stanza phrases it, Fohat traces spiral lines to unite the sixth to the seventh. So not the sixth, but the six, meaning the six principles are united to the seventh, the crown. And she comments on this stanza saying, the tracing of spiral lines refers to the evolution of man's as well as nature's principles, an evolution which takes place gradually, as does everything in nature. The sixth principle in man, buddhi, the divine soul, though a mere breath in our conceptions, is still something material when compared with divine spirit, or atma, of which it is the carrier or vehicle. Fohat, in his capacity of divine love, eros, the electric power of affinity and sympathy, is shown allegorically as trying to bring the pure spirit, the ray inseparable from the one absolute, into union with the soul, the two constituting in man the monad, and in nature the first link between ever unconditioned and the manifested. The first is now the second world of the Lypicas, has reference to the same. The Dhyan Chohans are referred to as a host of angelic beings appointed to guide and watch over each respective region from the beginning to the end of the manvantra. So these Dhyan Chohans, these celestial beings, exist from the very beginning and all the way through to the very end of the manvantra, even before man has evolved. They are the foundation, the principles upon which man's evolution takes place. It says here they are the mystic watchers of the Christian Kabbalists and alchemists, and relate symbolically as well as cosmogonically to the numerical system of the universe. Again, the numerical system being this number here. It says, Fohat takes 5 strides and builds a winged wheel at each corner of the square. The strides refer to both the cosmic and the human principles, the latter of which consist in the exoteric division of 3, spirit, soul, and body, and in the esoteric calculation of 7 principles, 3 rays of the essence and 4 aspects. Let's see, talks about the principles. She says, from the cosmic point of view, Fohat taking 5 strides refers here to the 5 upper planes of consciousness and being. The 6th and 7th counting downwards, being the astral and the terrestrial, or the lower planes. And the 4 winged wheels at each corner stand for the 4 holy ones and their armies, hosts. These are the 4 Maharajas, or great kings of the Dhyan Chohans. So, again, there's different classes of Dhyan Chohans. It's not just a single thing that, like, if there's a Dhyan Chohan entity that is that, it's not necessarily has the same job as another Dhyan Chohan. So there are these kings of the Dhyan Chohans, these 4 regents, they're called. She calls them the Devas, who preside each over one of the 4 cardinal points. So north, south, east, and west each have their own Dhyan Chohan assigned to them. And there are cosmical forces and distinct occult properties that go with each of those cardinal points. She doesn't go into what they are, at least not in this particular section. So she says these beings are also connected with karma, as the latter, karma, needs physical and material agents to carry out her decrees. So there's she says there's a misconception that karma is thrust upon us by these regents, these kings of the 4 compass directions. But she explains it like this. She says, we, as human beings, produce causes, and these awaken the corresponding powers in the sidereal world, which powers are magnetically and irresistibly attracted to and react upon those who produce these causes, whether such persons are practically the evildoers or simply thinkers who brood mischief. Thought is matter, we are taught by modern science, and every particle of existing matter must be a register of all that has happened. She says, or she's actually quoting the occult world here, that does not affect those, oh, sorry, oh yeah, sorry. So the position is that every thought, in addition to its physical accompaniment or brain change, exhibits an objective, though to us supersensuously objective, aspect on the astral plane. So all of our thoughts do have an impact on the astral, even if we can't necessarily perceive it directly. And it's through that process that there's this correspondence of energy that brings back to us the results of our actions. And those results, like that process, is all within karma. It is karma. So I'd like to talk about the Lypicas a little bit more. This seems to be much better. So she says there are 3 chief groups of builders, and as many of the planetary spirits and the Lipika, each group being again divided into 7 subgroups. She says in another section, I'm not sure if I read the quote here, I think we'll come upon it, but that we very quickly get to the point where these divisions can be subdivided into more subdivisions, and it becomes kind of dizzying at a certain point, and very hard to keep track of. So we're really only kind of scratching the surface of this. As we said, absorbing and lofty. She said the builders are the representatives of the first mind-born entities. Mind-born is the Manasa Putras. So we're just... which is Manasa Putras. Therefore, of the primeval Rishi Prajapati, this is another term, that she lists, it's a whole list of different different traditions that talk about kind of the same division of 3 and 4 and 7. She talks about the 7 great gods of Egypt with Osiris as the chief, the 7 Amsha spens of the Zoroastrians with Ormazd as the head, the 7 spirits of the face, the 7 Sephiroth separated from the first triad, and she says, etc., etc. Like, she could go on. There's even more. She says the second group of builders it's the architect of our planetary chain exclusively, and the third is the progenitor of humanity, the macrocosmic prototype of the microcosm. So these are the 3 groups. The 7 subgroups, she says the Lipika are the spirits of the universe, whereas the builders are only our planetary deities. The former, the Lipika, belong to the most occult portion of cosmogenesis, which cannot be given here, she said. And here is a reference to how the adepts and the Mahatmas, by extension, sort of fit into this. The statement is, whether the adepts, even the highest, know this angelic order in the completeness of its triple degrees, or only the lower one connected with the records of our world, is something which the writers are unprepared to say. And she would incline rather to the latter supposition. In other words, she's saying that she says she's not inclined she's unprepared to say whether the adepts really fully know, whether even the adepts fully know, the highest ones, this angelic order in all of its 3 degrees. But she is inclined to say that even the highest adepts only know the lowest order of these Lipika. And that lowest order are the scribes. They're the ones that are recording in the Akashic records every act and deed and thought and word that anything that ever happens is recorded by the Lipika in the Akashic records. But that's only their lowest order. It's also in this passage where she, and again, sorry to jump around, but this is where she names the regents that are in charge of the 4 cardinal points. Indra rules the east, Yama the south, Varuna the west, and Kuvira the north. This is where she says, the stanza proceeds with a minute classification of the orders of angelic hierarchy. From the group of 4 and 7 emanates the mind-born group of 10, of 12, of 21, etc. All these divided again into subgroups or septenaries, novems, duodecimals, and so on, until the mind is lost in this endless enumeration of celestial hosts and beings, each having its distinct task in the ruling of the visible cosmos during its existence. So this is what I was saying about how, even for her, she conveys this as, how does she put it, the mind is lost in endless enumeration. And obviously she's talking about a much more detailed level than what we're doing. So it challenges us as students to at least grasp what she's given us. She's saved us from even, like the most arcane part of this, but if we can at least begin to understand this. She says the those who have been called Lipicas, the recorders of the karmic ledger. They make an impassable barrier between the personal ego and the impersonal self, the noumenon and parent source of the former, hence the allegory. They circumscribe the manifested world of matter with the ring passed not. This world is the symbol, objective, of one divided into many on the planes of illusion. And this one is the collective aggregate or totality of the principal creators or architects of this visible universe. Just another reference to the ring pass not set up by the Dhyan Chohans. She makes a distinction between the Dhyan Chohans and the Lypicas. She says the Lipika are the spirits of the universe, whereas the builders are only our planetary deities. We talked about the two ones already. She says, in the highest world, we are taught, belong the 7 orders of the purely divine spirits. The purely divine spirits being the Dhyan Chohans, or maybe the Lypicas. And to the 6 lower ones belong the hierarchies that can occasionally be seen and heard by men. That's the Dhyan Chohans. And who do communicate with their progeny of the earth, which progeny is indissolubly linked with them, each principle in man having its direct source in the nature of those great beings who furnish us with the respective invisible elements in us. This is again talking about how it's the Dhyan Chohans that provide us with the principles that we use to evolve. She then has this section talking about these 7 different orders of celestial beings. She says that the hierarchy of creative powers is divided into 7, 4, and 3, esoteric, within the 12 great orders recorded in the 12 signs of the zodiac. So the 7 of the manifesting scale being connected with the 7 planets. All this is subdivided into numberless groups of divine, spiritual, semi-spiritual, and ethereal beings. The first order of celestial beings, she calls this the chief hierarchies. Among these are hinted at in the great quaternary, or the 4 bodies and the 3 faculties of Brahma, exoterically. The 5 Dhyani Buddhas in the Buddhist system. She says this highest group is composed of divine flames, so-called, also spoken of as the fiery lions and the lions of life. And the esotericism of that is securely hidden in the zodiac sign of Leo. She says that this highest group is the nucleole of the superior divine world. They are the formless, fiery breaths, identical in one aspect with the upper Sephirothal triad, which is placed by the Kabbalist in the archetypal world. Let's see this. Okay. So you can see at this level, this highest level of creative powers is very, very high. It's very inaccessible to mortal man. She talks in depth about a correspondence between the Japanese cosmogony and this cosmogony. She says the upper and lower hierarchies emanate from the heavenly or celestial virgin, the great mother in all religions, the androgen. She says that this is connected with the Sephira as the crown, and the abstract principle as a mathematical X, the unknown quantity. On the plane of differentiated nature, she's the female counterpart of Adam Kadmon, the first androgen. But as this celestial version, the Great Mother, it is also regarded as Brahma, who manifests out of himself a duality, which is really where we have the male and female aspects. In and of itself, Brahma is considered androgynous, really for the reason that we just described. And then she talks about, in its unity, primordial light is the seventh or highest principle, diaviti prakriti, the light of the unmanifested logos, that in differentiation becomes Fohat, or the seven suns. And then she describes some of the symbolism with the circle and the triangle and the hexagon, which relates to the 3 and the 4 and the 5. So there's a lot to unpack here. Once we start talking about the logos, then we're really looking at kind of cosmogenesis more than we are about hierarchies. But they do overlap as subjects. It's difficult to talk about one without at least mentioning the other. That again is all just around the idea of the first order of celestial beings. She says that the second order of celestial beings is connected to Atma and Buddhi, spirit and soul. She calls it those of fire and ether, corresponding to spirit and soul, or the Atma Buddhi, whose names are legion, are still formless, but more definitely substantial. They are the first differentiation in the second evolution, or creation. Prototypes of the incarnating jivas, or monads, composed of the fiery spirit of life. It is through these that passes like a pure solar beam the ray which is furnished by them with its future vehicle, the divine soul, Buddhi. These are directly concerned with the hosts of the higher world of our system. From these twofold units emanate the threefold. She has this one sentence essentially on the third order of celestial beings. She says they correspond to Atma, Buddhi, Manas, spirit, soul, and intellect, and they are called the triads. So the third order of celestial beings are called the triads. The fourth, she says, are substantial entities. They're the highest among the rupas, or atomic forms. Rupas means bodies. And she says it is the nursery of the human, conscious, spiritual souls. They're called the imperishable jivas, and constitute, through the order below their own, the first group of the first septenary host. The fifth group, she says, is a very mysterious one, as it's connected with the microcosmic pentagon, the 5-pointed star representing man. She goes on to talk about the zodiac sign of Capricorn, which is associated with in the Hindu astrological system, the Makara, which is the crocodile. Whole symbolism around this fifth group of celestial beings. And she actually has more on that here. The fifth group of celestial beings is supposed to contain in itself the dual attributes of both the spiritual and physical aspects of the universe, the two poles, so to say, of Mahat, the universal intelligence, and the dual nature of man, the spiritual and the physical. Hence its number 5, multiplied and made into 10, connecting it to the Makara, the 10th sign of the zodiac, or Capricorn. The 6th and 7th groups, she discusses kind of together, and then she splits off and talks a little bit more about the 6th. She says These groups partake of the lower qualities of the quaternary. They are conscious, ethereal entities, as invisible as ether, which are shot out like the boughs of a tree from the first central group of the four, and shoot out in their turn numberless side groups, the lower of which are the nature spirits or elementals, or countless kinds and varieties from the formless and unsubstantial, the ideal thoughts of their creators, down to the atomic, though to human perception, invisible organisms. The latter are considered as the spirits of the atoms, for they are the first removed backwards from the physical atom, sentient, if not intelligent creatures. She then goes on to talk about how the hierarchies are associated with karma, and how the Dhyan Chohans are subject to karma because of the nature of sort of manifested existence. Karma having sway at all levels up through Brahma. So she says, the doctrine teaches that there are no such privileged beings in our universe, whether in our or in another system, in the outer or the inner worlds, as the angels of the Western religion and the Judean. That is, a Dhyan Chohan has to become one. He cannot be born or appear suddenly on the plane of life as a full-blown angel. The celestial hierarchy of the present manvantra will find itself transferred in the next cycle of life into higher, superior worlds, and will make room for a new hierarchy composed of the elect ones of our mankind. So it's tempting to think, when we think of angels, when we think of cosmic hierarchies, celestial beings, that they aren't human, that they are, and in many ways they aren't, right? They don't represent they represent really the five middle principles of humanity. They don't have physical bodies, and they don't, and they are sort of emanations from the highest spiritual. So they really are the foundation for mankind's evolution. And in that sense, we feel a distinction drawn between them and mankind itself. But as this is saying, they are, and there's another quote later that will underscore this, they did not just come from nothing. They came out of evolving humanity. So again, they're not, they don't just appear, they have to become, in the same sense that we do. She says the sixth group remains inseparable from man, who draws from it all but his highest and lowest principles, or his spirit and body, the five middle human principles being the very essence of those dhyanis. Alone the divine ray, the Atman, proceeds directly from the One. It is in the same sense in the material world where the Son is, in one way, his Father, being his blood, the bone of his bone, and the flesh of his flesh. To this the answer is, verily it is so, but one has to go deep into the mystery of being before one can fully comprehend this truth. That's certainly the case with all of this, one would say. The time is running out. Touch on a few other ideas. She gives many examples of other systems that give ideas about hierarchies. She says, on the same subject of how man is the origin of the hierarchy, she says, the whole cosmos is guided, controlled, and animated by this endless series of hierarchies, or she says almost endless series of hierarchies, of sentient beings, each having a mission to perform, and who, whether we give to them one name or another, and call them Dhyan Chohans or angels, are messengers in the sense only that they are agents of karmic and cosmic laws. They are infinitely in their respective degrees of consciousness and intelligence, and to call them all pure spirits without any of the earthly alloy which time is launched to prey upon is only to indulge in poetical fancy. For each of these beings either was or prepares to become a man, if not in the present, then in a past or a coming cycle, manvantra. They are perfected when not incipient men, and differ morally from the terrestrial human beings on their higher, less material spheres, only in that they are devoid of the feeling of personality and of the human emotional nature, two purely earthly characteristics. So it's saying that the Dhyan Chohans do not have personalities. We can't assign a particular will to one versus another other than the role that it's to play, like the job that it has. They're all assigned their individual duties, but they don't have any personal nature that can be ascribed to them. There is a set of attributes or qualities that are associated with the different classes of Dhyan Chohans. So within one set of Dhyan Chohans, they may have a set of attributes that they all share, but they don't have individual personalities. She says, the perfected have become free from those feelings because A, they have no longer fleshly bodies, and B, the pure spiritual element being left untrammeled and more free. They are less influenced by Maya than man can ever be, unless he is an adept who keeps his two personalities, the spiritual and the physical, entirely separated. So there's two more things I want to cover very briefly. So in this pamphlet is recalled a quote from Mahatma M. On that treats this concept of evolving. He says that man physically is a compound of all the kingdoms, and spiritually, his individuality is no worse for being shut up within the casing of an ant than it is for being inside a king. Let that sink in for just a moment. It is not the outward or physical shape that dishonors and pollutes the five principles, but the mental perversity. Then it is but at his fourth round, when arrived at the full possession of his kama energy and completely matured, that man becomes fully responsible. As at the sixth, he may become a Buddha, and at the seventh, before the pralaya, a Dhyan Chohan. So if we chart this briefly, talking about the principles beginning with, well, he talks about the physical, but really starts sort of with kama, which is the desire nature. This is the fourth. It's referring to it as the fourth round of evolution. I think next week's talk is on rounds, gold rounds and races, so we'll cover this more next week. But then there's the fifth, which of course is the monastic, and the sixth is Buddhi. It might make more sense actually to do this upwards, but and then the seventh is Atma. So this was desire, and the Mahatma is saying that once we reach a maturity at this point, we then, evolve to the monastic level, and it's at that level that we can defile. He calls it mental perversity, mental manas. This is mind. So it's the mental perversity that can actually affect the that casing, that outward physical shape, of dishonoring and polluting it. But then he says that once that's fully matured, man becomes fully responsible. As at the sixth, he may become a Buddha. So so this is man, this is animal, essentially. Man, this is Buddha. We should probably have put something like desire, mind, wisdom or something in there. And then this is where the Dhyan Chohan stage becomes an option, we'll say. Right? It isn't. You don't have to choose to become a Dhyan Chohan. There are other types of existence that one can take. But this is how compassion matters, right? Because the Mahatmas, the Buddhas, are the exemplars of compassion, right? You can't get to be a Dhyan Chohan without going through this process of perfecting compassion. There's a reference to compassion where compassion begins in the kama state. Probably don't have time for that. Let's just break and spend a few minutes on questions. Sorry, I went all along. Yeah, please go ahead.
I wanted to know if the Dhyan Chohans act with the collective mind or individual mind?
Individual. It's said that the only thing they don't have is that personal level. But other than that, they're fully principled. They have the same principles that we do, and but it's such a rarefied, purified mission that they have, their singular purpose being whatever it is. But they do have an independent existence at the mental level, from my understanding.
But they don't have 1, 2, and 3 of the principles.
Well, no. I mean, perhaps. Well, certainly not one. They don't have a physical body. I'm not sure why in this particular quote, maybe there's more to it, it's just a short thing. There isn't a mention of the second and third, but which of course is astral and like prana. They exist again at such a ontologically high level that there's like it's probably not prana, it's more jiva. It's like it's at that universal principle level. But I don't think it's still, they still have a monastic quality to them. Again, universal but individual. Good question, yeah.
In the Secret Doctrine, it is stated that our universe comes about through sankalpa, which is the eternal ideation in the eternal mind. And these groups of builders, she calls them cosmocrators in the Secret Doctrine, are powers of nature. So how can we possibly give them these attributes, especially the fourth and the fifth? By the way, they're not separate. Kama manas in humanity is yoked together, because it's kama that is being constantly pulling downward, because we have made that as a personal desire. Whereas in the universal ideation, kama, there's a kama diva, which is God of love, but it is universal love, which is at the center of our being. Since we come from them, and that center is kama diva, that means that that love is universal. So that ideation obviously has compassion and love at its core as well.
Right. Yeah, this is true. To go back to the beginning of what you said, as far as their individuality and what level of each principle they have and how independent they are, it's really going to depend a lot on what type of Dhyan Chohan you're talking about. She says there's endless divisions of this, and the speaker's correct, the student's correct. It would not be accurate to say that this is the case for all of them. This was really talking about humans and becoming Dhyan Chohans. This was not here to label the qualities of a Dhyan Chohan, except that you don't lose these. Right? It's very confusing, because what she says is that there's there's this incipient state, right? She says they are perfected when not incipient men, meaning they aren't perfected when they are incipient men. I'm just not sure what that means. They differ morally from terrestrial human beings on the higher, less material spheres, only that they are devoid of the feeling of personality and of the human emotional nature. So personality, the emotional nature, those are two purely earthly characteristics. They've become free of those. So it's definitely worth more investigation. Elsewhere in the Secret Doctrine, just a page later, she talks about man as being a compound of the essences of all of these celestial hierarchies, and as such may succeed in making himself superior in one sense to any hierarchy or class, or even combination of them. Man can neither propitiate nor command the Devas, so man can't control these. They can't propitiate them, create them, or make them do what they want. She says, but by paralyzing his lower personality and arriving thereby at the full knowledge of the non-separateness of his higher self from the one absolute self. So the Dhyan Chohans don't have this difficulty, right? They don't have a lower nature they have to paralyze. But we do, and if we do, we can come to this realization of the higher self. These guys already have it, the Dhyan Chohans already have it. But by doing so, man can, even during his terrestrial life, become as one of us, it says, meaning one of the Dhyan Chohans. So by eating of the fruit of knowledge, which dispels ignorance, man becomes like one of the Elohim or the Dhyanis. And once on their plane, the spirit of solidarity and perfect harmony, spirit of solidarity and perfect harmony, that's the celestial hierarchies, must extend over him and protect him in every particular. So there's definitely a correspondence, beyond just them setting up the principles and the structure. There's this evolution from one to the other. But there's this talk of the incipient stuff, so I'm not really sure how that fits in. So.
If I may make another comment. It's in the Secret Doctrine, I don't know what section it is in, but she says that Amitabha is the Buddha's parentage. Mm-hmm. This student does not know if that's the only one on earth or otherwise, but in the Voice of the Silence there are 3 specific perfections that she refers to, and she calls them Dhyani Buddhas, and she says that each one of those, and at the beginning of the manvantra there's 7 different lineages, is the giver of our individuality. However that works into this scheme, this student does not know. But so the Dhyan Chohans obviously have the Dhyani Buddhas underneath them too. Right. Amitabha is the only one that she mentions. You mentioned 5? 5 Buddhas.
Yeah. I don't know what the names are, but that's how it was put in here. The first quote we read about them evolving was that the celestial hierarchies at the end of the manvantra move on to the next manvantra to still higher planes. Mm-hmm. They don't go back into being human, but that leaves behind vacancies for other humans that have reached that level. The Mahatmas, the Buddhas, can then fill in those vacancies as the new class of hierarchies, the new
celestial ones.
Yeah, the new celestial beings. So you can become a planetary spirit, for example, but it's a matter of perfecting yourself in the human form and being at the end of the pralaya available to fill in the vacancy left when the hierarchy moves on to other higher planes in the next manvantra. That's how it's phrased here.
When you say you're talking about the higher self and Buddhimanas connected, right?
Yes. Yeah, the reincarnating ego, the monad.
Talking about Herb.
Sorry?
Talking about Herb as a person and Herb as
Individuality.
an ego,
Yeah.
individuality.
Right, but it wouldn't have the name Herb. That's just in this
Oh,
life that he
okay.
has that name.
Huh? Well, maybe he might
Herb
go
is
on again
connected
as
to
a
personality on this.
as Herb, maybe, couldn't he? It's possible, but it's
Sure.
big, even on that.
I'm sure there's been plenty of Johns that have been reincarnated as a John. It's a pretty common name. I'm sorry, you had your hand raised.
No, I was just going to say that that statement of the philosophy that perfectibility is an endless process. Your talk today makes that very clear.
Yeah, and I think what was hard to kind of bring out, but I did want to emphasize, is that it's compassion that really it's what drives the whole process. There's a mention of compassion in the entry in the glossary on Kama Diva. There's a lot more about Kama in the entry on Kama Diva than there is in the entry on Kama. The entry on Kama alone just says evil desire, lust, volition, the cleaving to existence. Kama is generally identified with Mara, the tempter. Right? But if we read the entry on Kama Diva, I won't read the whole thing, but it's a much different picture. She says, Kama, a most mysterious and metaphysical subject. The earlier Vedic description of Kama alone gives the keynote. Kama is the first conscious, all-embracing desire for universal good, love, and for all that lives and feels, needs help and kindness. The first feeling of infinite, tender compassion and mercy that arose in the consciousness of the creative one force, as soon as it came into life and being as a ray from the Absolute. So that's a different kind of picture of Kama, right? That's the Kama of the Dhyan Chohans, right? They're operating at that level of compassion that's universal. The principles they're providing for us include Kama, right? That's their purpose. That these creator gods, they're creating these principles so that we can evolve. And compassion, as it says, is like the foundation of all of that. The first feeling of infinite tender compassion and mercy.
But would we not say that the Mahatmic lodge or brotherhood also exhibits that same quality in themselves? They're the best philanthropists on earth, so obviously, and according to the voice of the silence, they become the sons of these Dhyan Chohans.
Right.
They are gods themselves. So in that sense, then they exhibit that same quality, which is compassion absolute, as these beings do.
Yeah.
So we have hope
Sure.
to exhibit similar qualities on earth, if not to that degree, to a lesser degree perhaps.
Yeah. Certainly. There's a whole section on the mind-born sons and the Manasa Putras and the Kumaras that we just didn't have time for. Are there any other questions, comments, observations? So next week is human evolution, lands, and races. Thank you.